Victor was known for his incredible skill at the piano. His fingers danced across the keys with such precision that people often said he was more machine than man. He had earned every bit of his reputation, becoming a favorite at concert halls across the city. His name was synonymous with perfection in the music world, and he wore that title proudly. Every note he played was calculated, every phrase precise. But there was something about him, something off-putting, that many didn't realize at first. He was arrogant. Victor believed that he was above everyone else, especially when it came to his craft. He had spent years perfecting his technique, practicing until his fingers bled, but what he lacked was something more important: humility. He would never admit it, but the truth was, he saw others as beneath him. To him, playing the piano was not just about music, it was a performance to show his superiority. He loved to remind others of his greatness, even in casual conversations. It was on a breezy autumn afternoon when Victor's path crossed with someone who would challenge everything he thought he knew about music. Emily, a simple woman in her late 20s, was enjoying her afternoon in the park. She was not a famous musician or someone anyone would recognize, but she had her own quiet way of moving through the world. She often played the piano in the comfort of her small apartment. Far from the applause was still ringing in Emily's ears as she stood at the piano, a soft smile on her face. The simple melody she had played had not only captivated the crowd, but it had also done something unexpected. It had thrown Victor off balance. He stood off to the side, trying to hide the mix of emotions churning within him. He couldn't deny it anymore. There was something about Emily's performance that had shaken him. Victor had always prided himself on being the center of attention, the one everyone turned to when it came to music. He had spent years honing his craft, perfecting his technique, and developing a reputation that spanned across the globe. He had always believed that the best music was the kind that demanded attention, music that dazzled the audience with technical brilliance. It was music that relied on precision, on getting every note just right. He thought that was the only way to truly move people. The silence that followed Victor's performance felt thick, almost suffocating. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say or do. The polite clapping that followed his flawless piece had felt hollow, an acknowledgement of his technical brilliance, but not the applause he was accustomed to. As the sound of his last note echoed through the park, he glanced over at Emily. She was still standing by the piano, her expression calm and serene, as though she had not been in a musical battle at all. The park had emptied out, the crowd gone, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The sunlight, once bright and full, had started to fade, casting a warm, golden glow across the scene. Victor stood by the piano, his mind still racing with the thoughts and emotions that had surged through him in the past hour. The weight of the performance, of his own realization, was still heavy on his shoulders, but in a way, it felt lighter now. Emily had quietly left the piano bench, but she was still nearby, sitting on a bench under a tree, watching the sunset. She wasn't in a hurry to go anywhere. She was simply present. There was no rush, no need to be anywhere else. Victor looked over at her and felt a sense of calm that he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about how he looked or what people thought of him. There was no pressure, no need to be the best. He simply allowed himself to exist in the moment. He made his way over to the bench, feeling like a different person than he had when he first arrived. When he reached her, he sat down next to her without saying a word. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It felt comfortable, as though there was no need to fill it with meaningless chatter. They both just sat there, watching the sky shift from orange to pink, the peaceful quiet of the moment wrapping around them. After a few minutes, Victor spoke. "You know, I've spent so much of my life chasing after something I didn't really understand," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of his admission. "I thought if I became perfect, if I could play every note flawlessly, that everything would fall into place. But now, I don't know. I feel like I've been running in the wrong direction all this time. Emily turned her head slightly to look at him, her expression soft but understanding. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of perfection, she said, her voice calm and grounded. Especially when you're surrounded by people who only measure success by how perfect you are. But perfection isn't everything, Victor. It's the feeling, the connection, that matters more. Victor nodded slowly, the truth of her words sinking deep into him. For years, he had pushed himself beyond his limits, never satisfied, always striving for something just out of reach. But now, in the quiet of the park, he realized that what he had been looking for had always been within him. It wasn't about hitting the right notes, it was about feeling the music, allowing it to move through him and share something real with the world. I've been so focused on the technical side of things, on impressing others, that I forgot what music really means, he said, almost to himself. It's not about winning or being the best. It's about something deeper, something more personal. Emily smiled gently, her eyes filled with kindness. Exactly. It's not about competing or proving yourself. Music is about expression. It's about sharing something with others that comes from your heart, not from your ego. Victor let out a slow breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. The pressure he had felt for so long was beginning to lift. It was like a fog was clearing, and for the first time in ages, he could see things for what they really were. He had spent so much of his life trying to live up to an ideal, trying to be someone he thought he had to be, that he had forgotten who he really was. And now, in this quiet moment with Emily, he was starting to rediscover himself. I've been so afraid of not being good enough, he admitted, his voice soft. I thought if I wasn't perfect, if I didn't always win, then I wouldn't be worthy of being a musician at all. But now, I don't know. Maybe it's okay to not be perfect. Emily turned fully toward him now, her eyes meeting his with sincerity. Perfection isn't real, she said simply. And even if it was, it wouldn't be worth striving for. What matters is your heart, your connection to the music and to the people who listen. That's what makes it special. Not how flawless you are. Victor looked out across the park, the soft sound of the evening breeze in his ears. For the first time in a long while, he felt free. There was no pressure, no need to live up to anyone else's expectations. He didn't have to be the best. He didn't have to be perfect. He could just be himself, and that was enough. I think I understand now, he said quietly. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to be the best pianist in the world. I just need to play from the heart. Emily smiled, a warm and knowing smile. Exactly. And when you do that, the music will speak for itself. Victor felt a sense of peace settle inside him, like a weight had been lifted from his chest. He had spent so many years trying to control everything, to make every note sound perfect, to impress others with his skill. But in the end, none of that had brought him true happiness. What he had been looking for all along wasn't perfection, it was freedom. The freedom to express himself without fear, without worrying about what others thought. As the sun set, casting a soft glow over the park, Victor looked over at Emily, grateful for the lessons she had unknowingly shared with him. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but he felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about being the best pianist anymore. It was about being true to himself, about finding joy in the music rather than perfection. I'm glad we met, Victor said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. I don't think I would have figured this out on my own. Emily's smile was gentle, full of understanding. I'm glad too, she said simply. Sometimes, we need someone else to remind us of what really matters. They sat together in silence for a while longer, watching the last of the sunlight fade and the stars begin to appear in the sky. The world around them felt calm, and in that moment, everything felt right. Victor knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments when he would question himself, but he also knew that he had the answers within him now. The music wasn't about impressing others, about being flawless. It was about feeling, expressing, and sharing that feeling with the world. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Victor's mind raced. He had played the most difficult piece he knew, executed it with precision, but there was no spark, no magic in the air. Emily's simple performance had touched something deep within the audience, something that he had never been able to reach, no matter how technically perfect his performances had been. He had given everything he had, and yet, in comparison to her playing, it seemed insignificant. The crowd began to move slowly, some whispering to each other, others exchanging looks, but no one came rushing toward him for congratulations or praise. The sounds of the park, the rustling leaves, distant chatter seemed to grow louder, filling the silence around him. For the first time in years, Victor felt small. He stood up from the piano bench, not knowing how to leave, unsure of what to say. He had built his entire life around being the best, around perfecting every note, every phrase. Yet, now, that very pursuit of perfection seemed to have robbed him of something far more important. He didn't know how to fix it, how to turn back time and experience the joy of playing without the pressure to impress. As he looked at Emily, she seemed so at peace, so unburdened. It wasn't just her playing that had made her performance so captivating, it was the way she carried herself. She wasn't playing to prove something, nor was she measuring herself against anyone. She played from the heart, without thinking about the audience's opinion or the applause. To her, it was never about being the best, it was about sharing a part of herself with the world. Victor didn't understand how she could do that. How could she be so sure of herself, so content? How could she play without caring what others thought? He took a deep breath and finally walked toward her, unsure of what he was going to say. The words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, he felt like he was a stranger in his own life. He had spent so long trying to be perfect, trying to be the one who had all the answers, the one people looked to for guidance. But now, standing before Emily, he realized how little he truly understood about music and, perhaps, even about life. Emily noticed him approaching and smiled gently. There was no smugness, no satisfaction in her smile. She wasn't looking to gloat or to bask in the victory that, in truth, hadn't really been a competition at all. She simply smiled because she understood the power of music, the way it could connect people in ways words never could. "You play beautifully," Victor finally said, his voice softer than he expected. He couldn't hide the admiration in his words. He didn't know why it was so difficult to admit, but there it was, hanging between them. "Thank you," Emily replied, her tone kind but not patronizing. "I just play what feels right. It's not about being perfect." Victor stood there, unsure of what to say next. He wanted to ask her how she did it, how she was able to play without the overwhelming need to prove herself. How was she able to pour her heart into the music and still feel free? But he couldn't find the words. The question felt too personal, too vulnerable. Instead, he asked, "Don't you ever feel the need to be the best? To prove to everyone that you're worthy of being heard?" Emily's expression softened, and she took a step closer to him. "I think we all have our own definition of what it means to be the best," she said. "For me, it's about being true to myself. Music has always been something I do because it makes me feel whole, not because I want to impress anyone." Victor's heart tightened as she spoke. He had spent so many years measuring himself against others, constantly comparing his work to the standards of the music world, always chasing after perfection. But in the process, he had lost something. The joy he once felt in playing, the thrill of creating something beautiful, had been overshadowed by the pressure to always do better, to be better. He had forgotten the reason he had picked up the piano in the first place, because he loved it. It wasn't supposed to be about competition or winning accolades. It was supposed to be a way to express himself, to connect with others on a deeper level. But somewhere along the way, he had turned it into something that was all about him, about his ego, his pride, his need for validation. You don't have to be perfect, Emily continued, her voice gentle but firm. Music is about emotion, about connection. When you stop trying to control everything and just let it flow, that's when the magic happens. Victor's mind was spinning as her words sank in. He had spent so long chasing after perfection, after recognition, that he had never stopped to think about what truly mattered. He had been so focused on the applause, on being the one who was celebrated, that he had forgotten to enjoy the music for what it was. Maybe I've been doing it all wrong, he admitted, more to himself than to her. Maybe I've been so obsessed with being the best that I've forgotten why I started playing in the first place. Emily smiled again, a warm, understanding smile. It's not too late to remember, she said simply. Victor looked at her, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt free. Free from the pressure, free from the need to compete. He didn't need to be the best. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He just needed to play. To feel the music. To let it flow through him, to express himself without fear of judgment. In that moment, Victor realized that he had been chasing the wrong thing all along. The pursuit of perfection had never been about the music, it had always been about him. But now, standing in front of Emily, he understood what it truly meant to be a musician. It wasn't about flawless technique or earning applause. It was about honesty, about vulnerability, about allowing the music to take you wherever it needed to go. And as Emily looked at him with a kind smile, Victor knew that he had learned something far more valuable than any award or recognition he had ever received. He had learned to let go. But Emily's music wasn't like that. Her performance had been simple, yet it had struck a chord in a way Victor never expected. It hadn't been about perfection, it had been about feeling. It wasn't the kind of music that forced the listener to admire technique, it was the kind of music that invited the listener to feel what the player was feeling. It had a kind of honesty to it, a rawness that made it stand out. Victor couldn't shake the thought of it. His mind was racing, analyzing the performance, trying to figure out what he had missed. As much as he wanted to brush it off as something trivial, a part of him couldn't ignore the fact that the audience had been moved by something Emily had done, something he had failed to achieve. The crowd, still murmuring in admiration, was now turning their attention to him. It was his turn to respond. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of their gaze differently. Their eyes weren't filled with the usual awe that came with watching a master perform. Instead, there was a sense of expectation, a quiet questioning of whether he could do something more, something that could compare to what Emily had just shared with them. Victor cleared his throat and made his way back to the piano. He sat down slowly, his fingers hovering over the keys for a moment. The silence in the air felt heavy now, as if everyone was waiting for him to do something extraordinary. He didn't have the luxury of simply playing the same piece he had rehearsed earlier, he needed to give them something more. He needed to prove to them and to himself that he was still the best. He decided to choose another piece, one that was even more complex than the first. A difficult composition by Chopin, one that he knew could demonstrate his superior technique. It was full of fast runs, complicated rhythms, and intricate finger work. If anyone could master it, it was him. He was confident that, with this performance, he could erase the doubt that had crept into his mind after Emily's play. Victor's fingers began to move, the notes flying from his hands with speed and precision. His hands were a blur as he navigated the piece, each note falling into place like clockwork. The audience watched in silence, but this time, Victor noticed that their attention was different. They were still focused on him, but their expressions were no longer filled with the same sense of awe that they had shown earlier. He could feel the shift, the slight unease in the air. He played faster, harder, pushing himself to deliver every note with more intensity. But as he played, something began to feel off. The piece was technically perfect, but as he reached the climax, he couldn't ignore the growing emptiness inside. The more he played, the more he realized that he wasn't playing for the music anymore. He was playing to win. He was playing to silence the nagging voice in his mind that kept questioning whether his perfection was enough. He finished the piece with a flourish, a final, dramatic chord that reverberated through the air. The crowd clapped politely, but there was no thunderous applause this time. It was the same kind of applause he had received earlier, respectful, but not passionate. It wasn't the kind of response he was used to. In the back of his mind, Victor could feel the unease growing. The music had been flawless, but it hadn't been enough. As the clapping faded, Victor felt a pit form in his stomach. He had done everything right, everything he had always been taught to do, but it still didn't feel like enough. He turned toward Emily, who was still standing by the piano. She wasn't looking at him with competition in her eyes. She wasn't even worried about winning the duel. She was simply smiling, her gaze calm and kind, as if she didn't have a care in the world. It was then that Victor realized the difference between them. Emily wasn't playing to prove anything. She wasn't trying to show that she was the best or that her music was superior. She was playing because she loved it. The music flowed from her heart, not her ego. She wasn't concerned with applause or approval, she was simply sharing a piece of herself. And in that moment, Victor felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, envy. It wasn't jealousy of her talent, because he had that in spades. It was envy of the freedom she had in her music. She didn't have to hide behind technique or reputation. She was free to express herself in ways that he had never allowed himself to do. For all his mastery over the piano, he had never felt as connected to his music as she seemed to be. His obsession with perfection had kept him from ever truly experiencing the joy of playing. The realization hit him like a wave. The feeling of emptiness that had lingered in his chest wasn't because of his playing, it was because he had been chasing the wrong thing. He had been so focused on being the best that he had forgotten what music was truly about. It was about expression, not perfection. It was about feeling something deep inside and sharing that with the world. Victor's gaze shifted back to the audience, and for the first time, he didn't see them as an audience to impress. He saw them as fellow human beings, people who were listening, feeling, and experiencing music just like he was. He saw them not as judges, but as participants in the shared moment of music. But it was too late to take back the performance. The doubt that had crept into his mind was now a permanent presence. The music that had once filled him with pride now felt like it had trapped him. He was no longer the same man who had walked into the park with arrogance in his heart. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to fix it. Victor's hands rested on the piano keys, his fingers twitching slightly as the silence grew heavy. He had played, but it wasn't enough. The question lingered in the air: how could he ever be enough, he spotlight? Emily wasn't concerned with fame or perfection. She simply enjoyed the peace that came from playing the keys, losing herself in the melodies that she loved. Victor happened to walk by the park that afternoon. His usual air of superiority was evident as he strode through, his coat billowing behind him like he was the star of some grand play. He noticed Emily sitting at an old piano that had been placed under a tree. It wasn't the grandest piano, but it was clear she was making the most of it. The crowd that gathered around the park's piano was small, but it was enough to create an atmosphere charged with anticipation. People who were out for a casual walk stopped in their tracks when they saw the two pianists, one renowned and one unknown, preparing for an impromptu duel. They had no idea what they were about to witness, but there was an undeniable energy in the air, a tension that made the whole scene feel like something out of a movie. Victor was first to sit at the grand piano, a piece of equipment far superior to the old one Emily had been using. His fingers rested confidently on the polished keys as he surveyed the instrument, already feeling the rush of superiority that had always accompanied him in such settings. He had spent years refining his craft. He was the one who had performed in concert halls, who had received standing ovations from people across the world. He knew how to command the stage, and he intended to do the same today. Victor didn't need to think much about what to play. He chose one of his favorite pieces, a complicated sonata by Beethoven that showcased his technical prowess. It was the kind of music that would leave little room for mistakes, a piece that demanded complete precision. Every note was accounted for, every measure was calculated. He was sure that this would demonstrate, once again, just how much better he was than anyone else. With a deep breath, he began. His fingers moved swiftly across the keys, producing sharp, clean sounds that filled the air. The audience watched in awe as his hands flew over the piano, each note clear and distinct. He was doing what he did best, performing. His concentration was intense, his face set in a look of determination. He didn't notice how his chest puffed up with pride, how his posture straightened as though he was the ruler of the world. The crowd was silent, watching him in rapt attention, no one daring to speak or even breathe too loudly in fear of disturbing the performance. But despite all of his technical brilliance, something was missing. The music was flawless, yes, but it didn't feel alive. It didn't make anyone feel anything beyond admiration for his skill. The notes rang out perfectly, but they lacked the depth that made them resonate within people's hearts. To Victor, this was just a display of his talent, a way to show off his superiority, but for the audience, it felt hollow. There was no soul, no connection. When he finally finished, there was a brief silence, followed by polite applause. It was the kind of applause that acknowledged his skill, but didn't show the depth of true appreciation. The crowd was impressed, but not moved. Victor couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, though he quickly masked it with a smug smile. He had done what he came to do, prove that he was the best. Now, it was Emily's turn. She hadn't prepared anything in the same way Victor had. Her fingers hovered over the keys, her mind calm. She had no need to impress anyone. She simply wanted to share the music she loved. For Emily, the piano was an extension of herself. It was where she could be vulnerable, where she could express emotions she couldn't put into words. She didn't think about perfection or the crowd. She thought only of the connection she would make with the music and with the people listening. Victor, from his place at the side of the stage, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. What could she possibly play that would stand up to the grandeur of his performance? He expected something simple, something unrefined. But what bothered him even more was her calm demeanor. She wasn't nervous at all, not even a little. If anything, she seemed almost too relaxed for someone who had just been challenged by a world-class pianist. Emily took a deep breath before placing her fingers gently on the keys. She chose a song that she had played countless times before, a simple melody that held deep meaning for her. It wasn't a complicated piece, not by any stretch. It wasn't full of rapid-fire notes or dramatic shifts in tempo. It was a song she had learned as a child, one her grandmother had once played for her. To Emily, it represented comfort, warmth, and the love that had been passed down through generations. Her fingers glided effortlessly over the keys. The first few notes were soft, delicate, and steady. As the melody grew, so did the depth of her emotions. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, but the music seemed to take on a life of its own. Her playing was simple, yet there was a kind of beauty in that simplicity. The audience, still standing in silence, began to lean forward slightly, drawn into the story she was telling with each note. The sound wasn't sharp and technical like Victor's, but it was warm and inviting. The music was like a soft breeze on a summer day, carrying the weight of memories and emotions with it. The crowd began to shift, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the feeling of the music, others just watching in quiet awe. As she continued, Emily's fingers seemed to dance lightly on the keys. Each note she played felt like a soft invitation to those who listened, a chance to enter her world of simple beauty. The atmosphere around her changed. The warmth of the music filled the air, and even Victor found himself captivated, though he couldn't understand why. He felt an odd twinge of something he couldn't quite identify. His chest tightened, not from the usual feeling of superiority, but from a sudden awareness that the music Emily played had something his had lacked. Where his notes were crisp and perfect, hers were full of soul. Where his performance had been all about technicality, hers was all about connection. The more he listened, the more he began to understand that there was something powerful about playing from the heart, not from the head. The crowd's reaction grew more intense. Emily's melody had drawn them in, and now they were all quietly absorbed in the music. The connection she created with the audience was palpable. They weren't just listening to a pianist play, they were sharing in the experience with her. It wasn't just notes on a page, it was a story, a feeling, a memory. For a brief moment, there was no such thing as a world-class pianist or an amateur. There was just the music. As Emily reached the final note, she let it linger, allowing the sound to hang in the air for just a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't about the ending, it was about the journey. And when the last note finally faded, there was a long silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. The crowd seemed almost frozen in time, as if the music had somehow left them suspended in the moment. Then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, heartfelt appreciation. The audience wasn't clapping because they had to, they were clapping because they had felt something. They had been touched by the simplicity of Emily's music, something they hadn't expected. Victor stood there, still in his spot, watching the scene unfold before him. He was quiet, his mind racing. He had thought he would be the one to impress everyone. But now, as he stood there watching the crowd's reaction to Emily, he realized that what he had considered a mere duel had turned into something much more significant than he had ever expected. And it was only just beginning. At first, Victor didn't think much of it. He was in his own world, lost in his thoughts. But then, the sound of her music reached his ears. It wasn't perfect, not in the way he would expect from a true musician. The keys weren't always hit with the sharp precision he was used to hearing, but there was something about the sound that made him stop. The music was warm, simple, and inviting. It was as if the piano was speaking to him in a way he'd never experienced before. For a moment, Victor stood frozen, listening intently. He could tell she wasn't playing anything complex, just a simple melody. But it was beautiful in its own right. Curious, he moved closer, his steps purposeful but silent. Emily didn't notice him at first, too caught up in the music she was playing. When he was close enough, he couldn't help but make a small comment, one that slipped out before he could stop it. "You know," Victor said with a smug smile, "you're not playing that correctly. It's a very basic tune, but it could sound much better if you actually learned some technique." Emily stopped playing, startled by the sudden interruption. She looked up and saw him standing there, his posture full of arrogance, his gaze cold and judgmental. She could feel his critical eyes on her, and for a moment, she wasn't sure what to say. "I'm not trying to be perfect," Emily said softly, giving him a small, genuine smile. "I'm just enjoying the music." Victor scoffed. "That's the problem. Music isn't about enjoyment, it's about skill, precision, and mastery. You wouldn't understand." He could see the confusion in her eyes, and that only seemed to fuel his need to prove himself even more. "You see," he continued, stepping closer, "music is a language. And like any language, it requires a deep understanding of its rules. Without those rules, it's just noise. What you're playing, it's nothing but a distraction." Emily's smile faded, but she didn't back down. "Maybe you're right," she said, her voice calm. "Maybe it's just noise to you. But to me, it's something different. It's not about rules or perfection. It's about expression." Victor's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. He had met people like Emily before, people who didn't understand the importance of mastery, people who didn't care about precision. But something about her response intrigued him. She wasn't offended by his words, and she didn't try to defend herself in the way he expected. Instead, she sat there, silent, her fingers lightly touching the keys, waiting for him to say something else. She wasn't angry or upset, just curious about his next words. Victor felt a sudden rush of confidence. "How about this?" he said, a mischievous smile curling on his lips. "Why don't we settle this? A piano duel. You and me. Right here, right now." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. She had no interest in proving herself to him, but his challenge stirred something inside her. A quiet determination. She wasn't someone who backed down easily. "You think you can beat me?" Victor continued, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I can't imagine what you'd play, but I'm willing to see you try." There was no hesitation in Emily's response. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do it. But just so you know, I'm not playing to win. I'm playing because I love it." Victor was too caught up in his own arrogance to hear the sincerity in her words. All he could focus on was the fact that she had dared to challenge him, that she had the audacity to think she could stand up to him. He would crush her, he was certain of it. It would be easy. After all, how could a simple woman, someone who played for nothing more than her own enjoyment, possibly compete with a world-renowned pianist? He smirked, already imagining the outcome. "Prepare yourself. You won't know what hit you." With that, he took a seat at the piano, his fingers already twitching with anticipation. Emily, on the other hand, simply took a deep breath and sat at the opposite end, her hands resting gently on the keys. The challenge was set. And neither of them could have predicted how it would end.